I'm Mr. Lover Lover. She call me Mr. Bombastic. Tell me fantastic. Touch me on me back. She says I'm Mr. Rowe.
Welcome to the Golf Fitness Bomb Squad. I'm your host, Chris Finn, and that song never gets old. Thank you, Caleb. I'm excited today. We have a special guest with us. He is a friend of mine that I've had for a long time. Been in the business together, similar times, getting rolling, and he has been around. He's honestly, for those of you listening who don't know him, we'll make sure we share all of his contacts and everything with you at the end. I think one of my greatest respects for him is he speaks what he believes. He speaks based on science, and hence we get along. So, so without further ado, would love to welcome Dr. JP Guidry on. It's super excited to have you on, man.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be on and have the opportunity to chat a little bit about golf fitness and all the maybe BS that goes on. I know.
There's no BS. The best thing in the
You're
world
right.
is to stand on a Bosu ball and swing a golf club because that's going to increase your
Yeah, but
power output, right?
it doesn't look like the golf swing. It's not helping you, right?
That's well. I just thought that was all basically proven in all the research out there. Let's I think this one of the reasons we call this the golf fitness bombs because we like to debunk, drop a lot of the myths, drop some knowledge bombs. But before we get to that, why don't you give people listening who maybe don't know you, aren't familiar with you, kind of a little bit of your history and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so my name's JP Guidry. I live in Mandeville, Louisiana, where I own and operate Guidry Golf and Sport. So my background is I've got a doctorate in physical therapy. Started out in kind of general outpatient sports physical therapy. Ended up taking a lesson about 3 or 4 years into being a physical therapist from James Lights, who was kind of part of all TPI when they were starting up. And he was like, "Hey man, you like golf, you're a PT, they got this TPI thing. This is probably 15 years ago. I think you ought to check it out, go get certified." I know I'd love to have, he was teaching in the area, I'd love to have somebody I could refer to. So I did as he said, ended up getting level one certified, had my own outpatient business at the time and started kind of doing some golf stuff on the side. And as that grew, I ended up getting out of the outpatient stuff and the insurance stuff and dealing with all that and jumping into the golf stuff. And that's been, shoot, probably 10 to 12 years that I've been focusing solely on helping golfers hit it further, play without pain, and just be able to get out on the course as long as they live.
All good things. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the cool things for me is getting to talk to other physios, particularly in the cash space, because obviously that's a space you're in, and I think a lot of people, golfers, clients, like they just don't understand the differences. And obviously, you've worked in both of the insurance space and then cash space. What I'm curious, like just for you, like what have been some of the differences that you've seen in terms of what you've been able to do for people, when you're cash versus when you're have the insurance handcuffs on, as they say.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously, look, I can use my knowledge and expertise as I see fit rather than some guy sitting in an office, reading,
Or AI now. It's not
yeah,
even a
or
guy
AI
anymore.
now, yeah. Back then, looking at, diagnosis codes and saying, all right, well, you get 8 visits and that's all you're going to get versus that.
Yeah.
So we're, obviously we're sitting in front of the human being, having conversations with them and understanding what they need and how much they need. And so taking, as you say, those handcuffs off and being able to not even worry about that and just say, hey, this is what you need to get to your goals. This is what we're going to do for you. And I don't have anybody overseeing me saying, well, no, we're not going to give you 12. We're only going to give you 8 sessions. So, or whatever that may be. So, that's been was always my frustration being in the insurance based model. And since I've kind of stepped away from that, and it allows me to just be more creative in how I use my knowledge, right? I mean, we're PTs, we're doctorates now. We can kind of talk about whether that's worth it or not. But in the end, I paid for an extra year of school, so I might as well use that name.
Amen, brother. Yeah. Why not?
uh, so, but I think we should be allowed to kind of help as many people as we can and as many ways as we can, and get creative with that. I have my app and I can help people through that and hybrid models and in person and kind of get all these different ways to help people that the cash model allows that, insurance, wouldn't really cover a lot of that if I was still in that insurance, base uh, game, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of the game, I always remember I'd be trying to rehab people back in the when I was working in insurance as I was starting P4S golf, and obviously we're cash too at this point, and kind of always were. But when I, to pay the bills for the kids and the wife,
Hmm.
you do the outpatient thing while you're building up the cash side. And I just always remember you to get a golfer in there because they heard I was into golf, and you rehab the injury, and then you get them. You obviously want to get them back to hitting balls and see how their body reacts, and making sure they're not having flare ups and whatnot. That they have the capacity to play. And so we'd do some hitting, or I'd have them hit, range protocols or whatever. But I'd always have to document it as increased activity is tolerated. It was never
Yeah,
hit golf balls,
yeah, yeah,
30 balls. For,
yeah.
you do that, like immediate denial.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you got to figure out that speak, that language that they're looking for in those notes to pay you, which is
Yeah,
always
for
a
sure.
frustrating thing. Yeah,
Well, what are obviously being a physical therapist, and you're obviously working with golfers. What would in your practice are kind of like the top one, two most common injuries that you see with golfers, as they come in to see you.
yeah. I mean, definitely, as you probably know, low backs, above and beyond number one, and I,
Yeah.
in golf, but I think that's a lot of populations. But definitely in golfers, low back is heads and tails above any other complaint. Probably elbow, shoulder, I would see next. On that list with that. But with golf, as we know, it's more that repetitive nature. So I kind of view it as simplifying it is most golf injuries. It's not contact. You're not getting tackled. You're typically not falling down on the ground or anything. It's some combination of the body's inability to tolerate the stress you put on it, and then maybe that golfer's inability to regulate the stress they're putting on it. But you see it all the time this time of year. A golfer hadn't swung a club in 6 months, and then they go out and hit 100 balls every day, and they're, oh, now my elbow hurts. It's like, well, yeah,
Now they're shocked why
you
they
know,
hurt.
yeah. Or the other way, the golfer that sits at a desk all day and doesn't do anything for his body, and then his only activity is golf. And so I think it's a combination of preparing the body for more stress, to tolerate more stress, to move the way it needs to move, all these things, to minimize, I guess, the abnormal stress that's put on it, and then educating the golfer on how to kind of regulate that and manage those reps, based on the place they are at in that, continuing of their condition and abilities and healing and all that.
When you get a golfer coming in, we'll focus on back pain since I would agree with you that is by far and away the most popular one. How do you approach? It's funny when I have golf instructors on, I always ask the question like, how do you know when it's time to send them to a body person? For you, as the physical therapist, if somebody comes to you with back pain. If you talk about your kind of process of how you evaluate them, and then how you kind of will delineate like which of these causes are because physically they have issues, and then how do we know that maybe are there some swing contributors in terms of how they're swinging.
Yeah.
I think that'd be a cool thing for you to dive into for the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if someone comes to me, obviously I'm going to run them through a physical evaluation. I mean, typically with back pain, I'm always looking at hip mobility and thoracic spine mobility. 9 times out of 10, they're limited in one or if not both of those areas, from a, physical limitation standpoint. I'll watch them swing. I'll video their swing. Like I'm by far not a swing coach. I think I have a decent enough idea to kind of pick out some things. But and again, that's kind of part of that team approach, if you will. Obviously, if they're working with a teaching professional, that's where I may have a conversation with, hey, what are y'all working on? What do you see? And get their opinion maybe on the swing things that their faults, if you will, that are maybe putting stress on the body. And then for me, my mind's still going back to the limitations. Well, how much of that is, well, they just don't, that it's a, maybe a movement pattern thing versus, well, they can't swing the way the pro wants them to swing because their body can't do that. I would say typically more times it's kind of cleaning up that first, that mobility and that movement and strength or whatever kind of physical limitations I find, and then kind of stepping to that next step. Okay, let's reassess the swing and kind of look at those things as well. But every once in a while you'll get a golfer where it's like, all right, well, you move pretty well. maybe there's some minor things, and then maybe then, okay, that's telling my brain, all right, we need to spend more time kind of looking at the swing itself. And also, again, back to that load management thing, that rep management thing. How are they practicing? How are they playing? If there is kind of a swing fault that's putting stress on the body, well, if you're doing that 100 times a day, depending on the level of golfer, well, that's got the tendency to lead to pain and breakdown itself. But again, typically I'm trying to clear the body first, and more times than not, I mean, very rarely, I could probably count on one hand the amount of golfers that came in for back pain that didn't have some physical limitations. And again, most of them, hips and thoracic spine, again, 99% are going to have something there to start with.
100%. Yeah, talk more. I would love to share more about how you're looking at the load management. Is that something that we've looked at in rehab and some of the high level guys? But I'm really curious. Actually, it's not something I've ever really talked about with someone else in the field. Like, how do you talk about that with your clients when they come in, and just putting it in terms that the golfer with pain right now listening kind of would understand, and it kind of makes sense for them.
Yeah, so obviously, it's the question, digging into their history, or how often do you practice? Have you recently ramped up practice? Have you made a swing change? Again, you'll see golfers going through swing changes where they're doing more drills and working on swings and swinging more, kind of in a short period of time, versus like a slow ramp up. Obviously, if you're coming off of off season to in season type of thing, trying to educate them on not just grabbing the clubs out of the closet and going to make 100 swings every day, but how to ramp that stuff up. And again, I think that number probably looks different from golfer to golfer depending what level they're at, depending obviously the physical shape they're in. It may be, I have some golfers where it's like if it's acute and they're in bad enough shape, it's like, look, 10 to 20 balls is all I would hit, in one session, and working on that quality and resting in between, and typically, kind of getting away from that digging it out of the dirt approach to just banging balls until you figure it out, but more that quality over quantity. And I think a big part of that is that education piece of like, hey, that this golf swing is putting a certain amount of stress on your body. I think even in a perfect world, on a perfect body, it's still going to put a level of stress. So understanding like, we want to stay below that threshold where that stress turns into risk for pain and injury. And so for me, it's kind of trying to figure out where that threshold is for each person, and then, giving them a plan to kind of to nudge that line. So from the physical, as they get stronger, more mobile, better condition, we're bringing that threshold up, right? So that then gives them more room to play more, practice more, so on and so forth. But we kind of have to figure out where that is and then stay below that a little bit to try to stay out of that risk of injury range.
And how do you help, like, the amateur that comes to you to do that? And, are you like, do X amount of swings today, and then like, how do you quantify like how you feel? Like, how do you help guys do that? Because I think a lot of guys listening right now are like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But like, how do you actionalize that? How do you kind of put that in a way that's measurable for them?
Yeah, so I'll typically try to start with some kind of a number,
Okay.
20 swings, 30 swings, whatever it is. And then obviously, like, educate them how they feel, their feedback. We're trying to kind of have this ongoing conversation throughout the course of this, weeks or whatever, where it's like, all right, go hit 30 balls. But if at 20, you start feeling something adverse, pain, right? Well, maybe we need to stop there. So that's not an absolute number.
So you're giving them like guardrails along the
Yeah,
way.
typical.
Like,
Yeah, typical.
okay,
So
good.
it's like,
Okay.
we might have an idea of a number 30, but hey, look, if at 20 you start feeling bad, well, we're not going to force 30. If
Right.
30 feels good, then maybe the next session is 35, and let's see how you feel until we get to whatever that, their goal or their idea of a full session is, or it might be sessions per week,
Hmm.
however that looks. So yeah, it is a bit of kind of a range, some guardrails, but also, again, that education piece of them understanding, okay, well, what am I looking for adversely that tells me I need to stop,
I think that's so
type of
important
feeling.
to. I think that's so important to give them those, like, almost that see how you feel. And I'm curious, 'cause when we've done it, or when I've done it, like with clients, I'll definitely a similar approach. It's like, hey, let's try 30 today, but obviously, if you start feeling X symptom, like, stop. It just wasn't the day. do you ever run into? Because I would sometimes run into like somebody would go, they'd do what I asked them to do, and they'd say, "Yeah, I felt fine during," but then the next morning they're like super sore, or there's like a day after kind of element to that. I'm curious how you like would handle like do you put in rest days, or are you trying to say are you trying particularly if you have a competitive player who maybe needs to play, or a guy who needs to play like a member or member guest, and they got to play multiple days in a row. For the listener who like maybe has back pains trying to get back to playing multiple days in a row for an event like that, how would you kind of structure or kind of recommend that they prepare to get different where they maybe won't have a day to rest?
Yeah, so obviously, looking at it, making sure they're warming up properly, they're doing all the prep stuff properly, to get their body ready for that. I think, sometimes you do have to kind of make those changes on the fly. In those situations where it's like, or you might get a surprise reaction like that. Okay, like they've been feeling good, and then it's Wednesday and they got to play on Friday, and they go hit balls and their back flares up, and so it's like, oh,
Isn't that awesome
well,
when
I
that
got this.
happens?
Yeah,
That's the worst.
it,
That's like the worst phone call ever. You're like, hey,
absolutely.
Chris, so and so's John's on the phone. He wants to tell you about his back. Like, ah, God, he was doing so good.
Yeah. So, you kind of, you're scrambling to kind of manage that. I think again, obviously for me, a lot of times it's kind of the conversation of talking them off the ledge, letting them understand
Hmm.
like this can happen. I mean, it can be a normal part of this process. It's never a straight line of better, better, better. There's always these ups and downs. So I think part of that calms them, because in their mind it's the end of the world, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
oh
I
shit,
mean,
I'm not going to
yes.
be able to play this weekend,
Chicken Little,
whatever it
the
is.
sky is
Yeah.
falling.
So for me, I think that's the biggest part is just talking them off that ledge, and then giving them, okay, well, let's focus on this the next 2 days, whether it's some calm down movements for the back or mobility or
Hmm.
whatever it is, and let's just really focus on getting you feeling better, and then give you kind of a plan of ramping back up, whatever that may be. That may be the day of, but I think a lot of times, you know if you kind of talk them off that ledge, I think that takes care of a lot of stuff because, I think the more they kind of freak out and panic, it just amplifies all that anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, so I think that's probably the most important thing. And even educating golfers just in general with back pain that, like, look, it's not the end of the world. We figure this out. Back pain is a pretty normal feeling for most humans at some point. So understanding, okay, yeah, we do need to do something to get rid of it, but and acutely calm it down and kind of have a plan there. But part of that calming down, I think, is psychologically calming them down, for lack of better words.
There's always an element of the psychological when it comes to they call it physical therapy, but there is so much of it that's
Yeah.
managing expectations and the emotions and reactions 100%. Um, Speaking of emotional reactions, I know you and I have similar emotional reactions to some of this stuff on social media and Instagram around. Actually, we had a funny post. I think I put it out. It was like I don't know, something like doing something on a Bosu balls, like drinking three, like trying to walk after drinking some beers, where
I did
both
see
will
that post.
challenge your,
Yeah.
both of them will challenge your equilibrium, but neither
Neither
will
are going to
actually
help your
get you
golf game.
measurably
Yeah.
any good at golf. So with that in mind, obviously, and I think one of the reasons I've always enjoyed you is you have that strength and conditioning side to you, where it's not just a medical side. For you, over the years, I'm just curious, as it's become more mainstream, the golf fitness side of things, like what are some fads that you've kind of seen come and go, and then what are some that maybe you're still sticking around that you just kind of shake your head at this point?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think you tapped on a main one, which is the unstable surface training. That fires me up every time I see it. And it's just like the lack of just logical understanding of balance and transfer of training in that, and
Yeah.
you're training on an unstable surface to play a game on a stable surface, and if you know anything about the research around that, I mean, the carryover from unstable surface training really only gets you better at doing whatever you're doing on an unstable surface. Also, you look at the data that shows at least you're producing less force, your motor patterns are changing because again now your brain's going from completing whatever task you're trying to complete to like don't fall over, right? And so that's going to be some different movement patterns. So I don't, it irks me the most to see people swinging a golf club on that, because like the last thing your brain is worried about is hitting a golf ball or making the
You're
proper
playing
movement to do it.
you're playing in path. It's like, no, just don't fall
Yeah,
over.
yeah, that's all it is. It's like, our brain's number one job is keep us alive, right? So don't fall over is a good part of that. So, we lose sight of everything else, whether we're squatting or lunging or swinging a golf club or whatever. That goes out the window, and it's like, all right, the brain's doing everything it can with the body to not fall over, and that's not the goal. If I want to squat, I want to get stronger so I can produce more force into the ground, right? If I'm trying to swing a club, I want to swing a club the right way, and with the goal of hitting the golf ball to a target, not the goal of don't fall on my face. So, that's probably one of the biggest ones I still see. The other one, which is kind of more recently gotten popular, is this kind of idea of like do these X amount of exercises to fix this swing fault. That's another one that really kind of drives me nuts, because there is no exercise that's going to directly fix a swing fault, and I think a lot of it is a sales tactic. Look, golfers are desperate to swing better, and so they typically will eat anything up that gives them the promise that they will swing better, or not do the thing they do wrong, so to speak. I think that's just I think it's kind of snake oil in that sense, because look, there are exercises that can get you to move better or move through greater range of motions. There's exercises that can help you get stronger and produce more force, and maybe have a little better stable base or whatever that is. But none of those are directly going to fix a swing fault. I mean, I early extended my swing, and I could deadlift 2 times my body weight. So it's not like getting a stronger deadlift is fixed my swing. So that's
You mean there's
coming
not a
from
causational impact to that?
yeah, yeah, that's coming from all the stuff that I'm supposed to be doing that I don't do, that my instructor tells me to do. But
Exactly.
so again, like that, those things bother me, because whether or not the person's true intent is to mislead the golfer, I mean, it is very misleading. And they're usually, the problem with most of those exercises are usually low level pointless exercises in general anyway. So they're not going to help you even with the general physical attributes that you're really trying to build in the gym, nor will they help you fix
Never
your
mind the
swing.
golf swing. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, golfers, especially amateur golfers, like what's the biggest limitation for most of them is time. You know,
Hmm.
they've got families, they've got jobs, they want to be practicing and playing. So that only leaves so much time in the gym. So my biggest argument against all that is, we need to make sure their time available to work out is efficient, and giving them the biggest effect that it can. And those things just aren't going to move the needle very much, if at all.
100%. I mean, my biggest, my feeling is that any golfer who's listening right now could eliminate 90% of all the stuff that they do, and they probably would not see a negative impact to their golf game, because
Yeah,
90% of it is not really going to move the needle. And I think that's kind of always been our motto has been like, hey, what is the least amount of stuff I can do to create the greatest amount of impact? Because to your point,
100%.
like if people have 15 minutes, maybe I can get them to do that, right? And I mean, they all have 15 minutes. Let's be real; it's just not a
Yeah.
priority. But I think if assessing, not just kind of blindly throwing stuff at a piece of paper, and I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience too, where you get the guy who walks in with a 8 by 11 sheet of paper, two-sided, with all the exercises that they do. It's 7 days a week, and you're like, okay, dude, so we can just crumble this up, and we can throw this
Yeah.
over there. And let's just start with getting your hips to rotate, because your hip internal rotation, sir, is 0. So we got a little ways to go. Let's just start there. And then you get these guys doing like wait, you just gave me an hour back, and you're like, yeah, just do 30 minutes of this stuff. I don't know. Here's an idea. Maybe go putt, chip.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do something that you actually want to do. And it's amazing that when they start to do the right stuff, they actually start to see like improvement, and then eventually they're like, the bad habit kicks in. They're like, well, give me more, give me more, give me more, give me more, and you're like, no, dude, you're good. Like, go play more golf. But yeah, and I think to your point of the exercises that like, hey, this is gonna fix your golf swing. I think that's so well stated that I think whether malicious or not, the golfer will naturally make the jump from, oh, this exercise fixes that in my swing, without they don't. A lot of times, what I think is misunderstood is, to your point, the exercise is going to train a physical skill. That is not a
Yeah.
sport specific skill because there is no club in your hand and there's no little white ball down there, right? And you can fix all of the physical limitations that, we can use early extension as an example. You could have perfect hip rotation, you could be strong enough, have the great posture, and you just still may not understand how to not early extend in your golf swing or come over the top in your golf swing or be an upper body dominant. Like, you could pass all of the physical metrics. We see this all the
Mm-hmm.
time, where we'll get guys who like fail everything, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 months in, you're like, great, you pass all the physical metrics and you're still doing all these things. Well, the good news, I always joke, I say good news, bad news. I say, well, the good news is you don't have any more physical limitations. That's amazing. Like, you've checked all these boxes. The bad news is you're still doing the thing that you don't want to do in your golf swing, or your golf instructor said you don't want to do, and you no longer have the excuse that it's your body. So that's on me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Now you actually got to get good at golf.
Yeah, you
And
got to
I think
work,
that's such
you
an
got to put
important
that
point.
work in.
Yeah, that's an
Yeah.
important point I think to make.
No, I agree. And I think, look, golf's a game or a sport of skill, right? So I want them being able to work on that skill as much as they can, because that's really, what's going to move the needle more from a scoring standpoint, you know, if they have those limitations. So, I want them spending just enough time in the gym that they need to correct the things they need to correct or improve the things they need to improve, so that A, they can tolerate that time on the practice range or on the course, and B, they have the time to do it. Because, you know, the physical is there to the body, it's there to build a body that can move better, produce more force, produce more speed, you know, make a bigger turn, whatever that is, those basic characteristics that we can change in the gym, so that then they have the capacity. And I love the word capacity, because really, like I always say, like, I'm just giving the golfer
Hmm.
more capacity to do those things. Now, that doesn't mean they're magically going to hit the ball in the center of the club face and have a perfect looking swing. You still have to do that work along with it. Or when you hit those goals, now the focus becomes more on that work. My job is to build a body that can better, a bit, have the better capacity to do those things with greater ease and without pain.
Yeah, 100%. I always use the analogy of a jar of marbles. I think our job on the physical side is give people bigger jars that they can
Yeah,
fit more marbles in.
100%.
We're not teaching them how to throw the marbles or roll the marbles or anything to do with the marbles. We're just giving them more marbles, right? So they can
Correct.
practice longer or do whatever the coach is asking them to do longer. And then our job is to teach people to, to your point, the capacity side, there's a recovery element to that of like how, all right, you got more capacity. Now, how do we get you to get those marbles back in the jar after you just used them? And I think that's a piece that oftentimes, people miss. And, on that topic, like, what do you see? I think recovery is something that's not talked about enough. It's not obviously not super sexy for people,
No.
but obviously lack of it will lead to injuries, and then all of a sudden people care about it. Like, what do you think is or what do you see with your golfers as like the number one thing that they do wrong from a recovery perspective that could really help them stay healthier and play the game longer?
Well, I think, like globally, just having a plan, having a plan, practice plan, training plan, nutrition plan, sleep plan, having a plan for all these things that move the needle. They just kind of wing it, and then, wonder why they run out of gas or they get hurt, at the end of it. And so I think, and again, look, that plan's going to look different if you're on the PGA Tour versus if you're just, Joe Blow who plays on the weekends at his club. Obviously those plans are going to look very different, but the basic components of them are the same. We got to prioritize sleep. We got to make sure we're managing our reps, as we've talked about. And I think inside of managing reps is not only like how much we practice, but how often we rest, or how we, uh, prioritize rest and recovery. Nutrition to support all that. And then obviously managing the training, so we're doing the right things in the least amount of time. We're doing the things that move the needle the most. That B, that training isn't then bleeding over into our ability to recovery to play and practice, right? Because that's the other thing of doing a ton of volume of 100 different exercises that aren't doing anything, but stressing the body in ways that aren't meaningful. You guys still got to recover from that to some degree. So I think understanding that component and how all those pieces fit together in a plan over a week, over a month, over whatever that may be, and having that plan's ability to adjust. Especially, I would say like my main clientele at this point is kind of your 40 to 60-year-old amateur golfer, right? So most of them have kids.
They realize Father Time's coming knocking.
Yeah, so they're starting to see maybe
Yeah,
some of those distance losses or those
yeah,
aches and pains that they didn't have in their 20s and 30s.
yeah.
They don't have a ton of time. Most of them, could probably better prioritize some of that time. But in reality, look, they've got kids. Their kids probably
Hmm.
play sports. They have their job and their responsibilities with that, responsibility with the family. So it's understanding how to fit all these things that are part of your life. And these are the conversations I have when I'm evaluating somebody, is understanding, well, what does your schedule look like? What's a weekly schedule for you, your kids, your family, your job? And then we figure out, okay, well, how do we fit gym in there? How do we make sure we're getting our sleep we need? How do we, have a plan for, nutrition if we're trying to make some changes on that front? And where do we fit that training in, and what does that training look like? And again, I think that's where that subjective part of that evaluation that is so meaningful, in any realm of medicine or assessment, is getting to know them, their story, their situation, and then helping them fit a plan that works for them. And then understanding, look, those things change. You know, kids' sports are in season, out of season. Kids
Hmm.
grow up, all those things, jobs change, all those things change. How do we, giving them the tools to understand, like, how do I change with that?
Wait, you mean there's not one set of 5 exercises that a guy can do for the rest of his life?
According to social media, there is, but
There is, yeah. Well, I think that to me, I mean, that what you said is just so well said. And, just the point that's been a common, it's always a common frustration. I'd say it's not yet. It's generally like end of May as we get, it's kind of like, end of April, May. You guys are coming out of the off season. And they're like, okay, I'm good. I'm gonna go play more
yeah.
golf. I'll see you back in the fall. And you're like, dude, no, like you're just gonna be back to where we started. We got to repeat. Like, what's your in? And my favorite line is guys are like, "Nah, I know what to do now. Like, I'm way better. I know what to do." And I'm like, "Cool. So how are you gonna? What's your in season plan look like? How are you monitoring like volume and soreness and recovery?" And they look at you like, "Huh?" I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You have no idea. Like, like this is not a good idea. You are going to crash and burn." And
Correct.
some guys obviously will come come around to it, but other guys it's like, all right, well, I'll just see you when your back's hurting you. Generally, late August is when we call that duct
Hmm.
tape month.
Yeah, look, I mean, you kind of get the two extremes. You get the people that just quit training, quit doing anything, and then they're all golf. You get the people that don't understand what that training needs to shift to when
Hmm.
you are playing more
That's a
and
great point.
practicing more.
Great point.
And then they kind of wear themselves into the ground, and they both of them kind of end up in the same place, at the end of the summer, which is they're hurting. They've probably lost some distance over the course
Yeah.
of the golf season, and they're back at square one where they were last August, September when they came and saw you. And it's trying to, that education piece, and that is frustrating from our end, just trying to get them to understand that, you're just going to be spinning your wheels every year and starting back where you finish.
Yeah.
Why? I never understand that. Like, why put all this work in the winter just to lose it over the summer?
Yeah.
When you could keep things going and start better than you were last September, this September.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's kind of like parenting. You can
Yeah.
huff and puff till you're red in the face, but at the end of the day, who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're right.
you can't force them to do it. But my hope is everyone listening today is really kind of picked up a number of nuggets from you and the conversation around proper training, around the types of of options that are out there, on the medical side as well as on the training side. And obviously, stay off of unstable surfaces. Don't swing golf clubs on those.
Yes.
But JP, you put out a ton of good stuff on social and just add tons of value for people. Where's best places for them to follow you?
I'm pretty active on all social media. Twitter, I'm probably the most outspoken on.
Hmm.
With that, Guidry Golf and Sport, Instagram. A lot of more demonstrations and educational stuff there. Facebook, I have a YouTube channel, which again is more kind of demonstration, educational videos. Twitter's more kind of my place where I'll put out my takes. That makes everybody mad that doesn't agree with them. But
That's the
and that's
entertaining
kind,
one, ladies and gentlemen.
yeah,
That's the one to follow. Follow all of them, but definitely stay tuned
yeah.
to that one.
So I'm typically more, and again, there's always good nuggets in there, but
Yeah.
and I get some pushback on kind of how I react to things, but in my opinion, like that's our job. I think it's our job to educate the public.
Yeah.
It's our job to kind of dispel those myths, whether everybody agrees with me or not. I mean, I'm pretty secure in my beliefs and my knowledge on that. And you know, do I know everything? No, but I think I have a pretty good idea of how to best approach, you know, golf fitness, golf rehab. You know, and no one to this point has shown me enough evidence for those things to make me change my mind. And in fact, the more evidence I see just continues to you know, back up, you know, my
Yeah.
beliefs on that, you know. And so uh, you know, I'm pretty outspoken there. I'm pretty, you know, upfront about my beliefs on that. And you know, some of it is kind of some emotional reactions at times, the things I see that frustrate me or kind of piss me off. But when you see it all day every day,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes by the same people, it's like, you know, it's hard to kind of keep it in
Yeah.
when you know it's wrong. And like I
Yeah.
said, I don't
Exactly.
know if their intent is what their intent is putting it out there, but I do know it's misleading and false. And you know, I feel like part of being a professional in this world, you know, I think that's our job. Is that's the beauty of social media, is we have access to more people. I
Hmm.
think that's part of our job, is to provide that educational piece and kind of clear up that stuff, so that golfers are, the time they are spending in the gym, they are getting results from it.
For sure. Well, I know my my marketing team made me get on Twitter about 60, 90 days ago. I withheld out for this long, but I enjoy your posts, so I read them.
It's
But
I have to step away every now and then because
yeah,
it gets a little much, but yeah,
it's
I'll
funny though. I've
usually come
avoided
back.
it for over a decade, but they're like, "No, dude, we need you to go on there." And I was like, "All right, okay, here we go." But anyway, guys, we'll put all those, you know, all of JP's, you know, profiles, also ways to follow him, connect with him, and then the show notes, and definitely go check out his stuff. It's great. And JP, I can't thank you enough for coming on today and helping me dispel some myths, drop some knowledge bombs. It's been a blast, man.
Yeah, I'm glad to do it. I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome, cool. Well, everyone listening, thanks as always for hanging out with us here on the Golf Fitness Bomb Squad, and we'll look forward to catching you on the next episode.